Last time we spoke about the beginning of the Chinese Civil War. By early 1927, Chiang Kai-shek had assembled a team of right-wing KMT members and anti-communist allies like Dai Jitao and Wu Tucheng, strategizing to sever ties with the Soviet Union and gathering support from local gentry, merchants, and international diplomats. Despite publicly maintaining a facade of supporting the Soviet alliance, Chiang Kai-shek was secretly preparing an anti-communist campaign. The turning point came on April 12 of 1927, when Chiang Kai-shek's forces, with the help of the Green Gang, launched a brutal attack upon CCP members and workers in Shanghai, marking the beginning of the Shanghai Massacre. The violent crackdown spread across the country, leading to the collapse of the First United Front between the KMT and the CCP. In the aftermath, the CCP called for mobilization against the KMT, sparking further conflicts such as the Wuhan-Nanjing War and the Nanchang Uprising. Key CCP members like Hunan and Zhou Enlai emerged during this period, setting the stage for the next phase of the Chinese Civil War. This episode is the Nanchang and Autumn Harvest Uprisings. Welcome back to the Fall and Rise of China podcast. I'm your dutiful host, Greg Watson. But before we begin, I just want to remind you all that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Perhaps you want to learn a bit more about the history of Asia? Kings and Generals has an assortment of episodes on the history of Asia, and so much more, so go give them a look over at YouTube. So please subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And hey, don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found at YouTube and all major podcast platforms. Over on YouTube, I'm about to release a new episode on the invasion of the province of Rehe by Japanese forces in 1933. As for podcasts, I have my ongoing North Africa campaign during World War II series, and for about a month now, I've been focusing on some naval battles during the Pacific War with my co-host, Garov. But if you'd really like to support me further, please check out my Patreon account at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel, where for as little as $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive Patreon podcast, early access to all the content I make, and voting rights for what we'll tackle next. The exclusive Patreon podcast catalog is almost about 25 episodes now, so I think it's worth your while. Give it a look. We had left off in the midst of the Nanchang Uprising. On August 1st, the CCP's Second Front Army had successfully inflicted 3,000 casualties and captured more than 5,000 small arms of various types, 700,000 rounds of ammunition, and a few cannons. With more and more CCP-aligned units arriving, the army needed to be reorganized. It was decided the uprising army would continue to use the designation of the Second Front Army of the NRA, with Hu Long serving as its commander-in-chief and Yu Ting as its deputy. Yu Ting would also command the 11th Army, consisting of the 24th, 25th, and 10th Divisions. Li Rongjian would be his CCP party representative. Hu Long would command the 20th Army, consisting of the 1st and 2nd Divisions, with Liao Chaomu as his CCP party representative. Zhou Enlai, with Zhu De as his deputy, would lead the 9th Army, with Zhu Guqing as his CCP party representative. Altogether, they were about 20,000 men strong and very well armed. On August 2nd, tens of thousands of people gathered in Nanchang to celebrate the great victory and the establishment of the Revolutionary Committee. This drew a large number of new recruits, particularly young students. Upon hearing the news of the uprising, Wang Jingwei urgently dispatched Jiang Fakui and Zhu Peida to quell the uprisers. On August 3rd, in accordance with the orders from the CCP Central Committee, the Second Front Army withdrew from Nanchang, heading south along the Fu River. This withdrawal became known as the Little Long March. They planned to enter Guangdong province via Rujin and Xunwu, where they would first occupy Dongjiang. They hoped there they could develop further forces, perhaps gain foreign aid, and, if all went spectacularly well, maybe they could capture Guangzhou. Upon entering Jinshan County, the commander of the 10th Division, Tai Tingkai, expelled the communists from his ranks and instead took his division northeast into Jiangxi province, leaving the movement behind. A large reason he was able to pull this off was because the Second Front Army had been too hastily reorganized. The troops rushed into the new formations and left Nanchang far too fast. The conditions of their march were also quite rough. It was a scorching hot week. By the time they made it to Linchuan on August 7th, they now numbered 13,000 men. They rested in Linchuan for 3 days and then continued to advance southwards. On August 25th, their vanguard reached Renxian of Rujin County. Li Jishan, the commander of the NRA 8th Route Army, was stationed in Guangdong at this time. Li Jishan dispatched 9,000 troops led by Chuan Daijun from Guangzhou over to Huchang and around Wujin to block the advance of the Reds. He also transferred 9,000 troops led by Huang Shaohong's army based in Nanchang and Daiyu over to Yude to support Chuan Daijun. The CCP Front Committee took advantage of the fact Chuan and Hong's armies were not yet fully concentrated in the area, unleashing a one-by-one attack. On the 26th, the Reds attacked Renxian's defenders, routing them and capturing Rujin County. They then concentrated their forces to attack the main portion of Chuan Daijun's army in Huchang. After a fierce 4-day battle, they managed to capture Huchang County. The Reds reported inflicting over 6,000 casualties upon Chuan Daijun's army and capturing over 2,500 guns while suffering 2,000 casualties themselves. Then in early September, the Reds repelled an attack by Huang Shaohong's forces near Luokou, just due northwest of Huachang. Having survived the encounter, the Reds withdrew to Ruijin, one unit after another. Then they changed their route to head east, passing through Changting and Shanghang to Fujian province. From there they headed south along the Tingjiang River and the Hanjiang River. On the 22nd, the 25th Division of the 11th Army occupied Sanyiba in Dapu County of Guangdong Province. Meanwhile, the main force continued southwards and they occupied Cha'an and Shantou by the 23rd. During this period, Li Jishan ordered the remnants of Chuan Daijun's army to try and contain the 25th Division and Huang Shaohong's army to attack Cha'an via Fengshun. He also dispatched Chen Jitang and Xu Yue with 3 divisions, roughly 15,000 men from the East Route Army, to advance eastwards from Huyuan, hoping to force a decisive battle. By the way, for my Pacific War fans out there, Xu Yue will become one of China's greatest, if not the greatest general. Just a little bit about him. He was born to a peasant family in Xiaopingxi village of Guangdong in 1896. In 1907, he entered the Huangpu Military Primary School, and 2 years later he joined the Tongminghui. In 1917, he was admitted to the 6th class of the Baoding Military Academy. The next year, however, he departed in July to join Dr. Sun Yat-sen at Chen Jiangming's new army in Guangzhou. He entered their army as a captain, following the army into Fujian, where he helped capture over 20 counties centered around Jiangzhou. In 1920, he helped attack the Guangxi army of Tan Chunchuan, where the commander of the 1st Division, Deng Keng, appointed him as a major commanding a machine gun company. The following year, the machine gun company expanded into a full battalion. In 1921, Deng Keng ordered a personal guard to be formed to protect Dr. Sun Yat-sen, with Xu Yue, Yu Ting, and Zhang Fukuai as commanders of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd battalions. In March of 1922, when Chen Jiangming went to war with Dr. Sun Yat-sen, Xu Yue escorted his family to Guangzhou. There he defended the presidential palace, where a 10-hour battle emerged, nearly seeing Dr. Sun Yat-sen killed. Xu Yue and some of his men got Dr. Sun Yat-sen and his family away to safety as he led a campaign to quell Chen Jiangming's rebellion. As Chiang Kai-shek led troops to attack Chen Jiangming, Xu Yue was appointed Major General Adjacent and Chief of Staff of the 1st Division of the Guangdong Army. In 1925, he served as the Deputy Commander of the 14th Division of the 1st NRA Army. During the campaign heading east, Xu Yue proved himself a brilliant commander, enough to receive personal praise from Chiang Kai-shek via telegram. During the northern expedition, Xu Yue helped capture Jiangxi, Changsha, Luoyang, and Nanchang. He was promoted to commander of the 1st Division as the NRA invaded Zhejiang province, and he led men to capture Hangzhou, Nanjing, and Shanghai. However, after the Shanghai massacre, Xu Yue made a rather poor decision of publicly calling for Chiang Kai-shek to be arrested for being a counter-revolutionary. He was quickly purged from the 1st Army. He fled for Guangdong, where he found a post as a divisional commander under Li Jishan. Sorry about that little bit of a sidetrack there, but I happen to be writing a new episode highlighting some of the generals of the war in China, and of course he's on top of the list, so I had a lot of information on him. Now back to our story. The CCP Front Committee decided to establish a 3rd Division of the 20th Army, and they stationed them at Chaoshan. Thus, there was about 6,500 men positioned to meet the enemy's advance. On September the 28th, the main bulk of the Red Army encountered the East Route Army near Shanhu of Zhujiang County. The Reds managed to defeat them, and they marched upon Tangkung, where they fought a fierce battle near Fengshui village, where to this very day a monument stands dedicated to the battle. By the 30th, the Reds had suffered another 2,000 casualties. They were unable to put up much of a fight, so they had to pull back to Juyang. That same night, Huang Xiaohang's men recaptured Xiao'an. On October the 3rd, the Red Army evacuated Shaoshan and advanced to Haifeng, passing through the Duanhua Mountain. However, en route they were intercepted by the East Route Army, leading to a bloody battle where they were broken pretty badly. Units and commanders dispersed, with one large force of 1,300 men making it to Haifeng. The Reds had suffered a disastrous and decisive defeat, with only over 1,000 troops remaining as a complete unit. They would later be reformed into a regiment. Jie De and Chen Yi faked their names and sought refuge amongst the local Hunanese warlord forces. Starting basically from scratch, they turned their little force into a 10,000-man strong army, who would go on to fight in the border areas of Fujian, Guangdong, Jiangxi, and Hunan, managing to save 800 Reds who were simultaneously performing an uprising in southern Hunan. Countless were arrested, deserted, or went into exile. Zhou Enlai, Yu Jiangying, and Yi Ting lost contact with the others as they fled to British Hong Kong, with Zhou Enlai becoming seriously ill. The three had 2 pistols with them, and they were successful in reaching Hong Kong. Li Rongjian, the other communist leader, also successfully escaped to Hong Kong. Hu Long, who had strongly opposed the Little Long March plan, accurately pointed out that marching 1,000 miles in the blazing heat of summer would put too much strain on the troops, and that Hunan would have been a better place to set up shop rather than Guangdong. Hu Long simply took up and went home, demoted from his position as commander. It is said he became a beggar, and he was not well received by his family. Yet he would rise back up and lead a 3,000-man strong Red force, who would later be wiped out by the KMT. By April of 1928, these forces would contribute to the Autumn Harvest Uprising, something we will talk about a bit later. The Nanchang Uprising saw the first shots in armed resistance against the KMT. It was also when the CCP officially declared their firm stance against the KMT, and marked the beginning of their journey to create their own military. Within the vacuum of hundreds of smaller uprisings, the Nanchang Uprising, alongside 2 other events we will talk about, the Guangzhou Uprising and the Autumn Harvest Uprising, are the 3 most important uprisings during this period. Now, back on August the 7th, the CCP Central Committee held an emergency meeting in Hankow, known as the August 7th meeting. Here they abandoned Chen Duxiu's right-wing appeasement strategy and determined a new policy that would involve implementing land revolution and armed uprisings. They called upon the entire party and people of China to resist the KMT. This saw widespread uprisings spring up all over the place. One of their largest campaigns was referred to as the Autumn Harvest Uprising, which would be performed in Hunan, Hubei, Guangdong, and Jiangxi, where the foundation of the workers' and peasant movements were the highest. A lot was debated about how to perform such a campaign. Many called for making the Peasant Association the center of it by declaring them a type of local government, whence the CCP would seize all the power from them. In addition to seizing rural power, they needed the backing of urban workers and the poor. Many pointed out that the Autumn Harvest Uprising, like the Nanchang Uprising, should have the main purpose of launching a land revolution. It would be optimal if it was launched simultaneously in Hunan, centered around Hanyang, Changsha, and if possible, Baoqing. After their August 7th conference, the CCP Central Committee sent one Mao Zedong and Peng Gongda, at the time also members of the Provincial Political Bureau, to Hunan to reorganize the Hunan Provincial Committee. For the Autumn Harvest Uprising, Mao Zedong was appointed the Central Special Commissioner, with Peng Gongda as Secretary of the Provincial Committee. Now, we haven't really spoken much about Mao Zedong in some time. I think the last time we left off about him was with the founding of the CCP party. In 1921, alongside those like Chen Duxiu and Li Dajiao, he too was a founder, and he began setting up a branch of the CCP in Changsha. Within Hunan, he also established a branch of the Socialist Youth Corps and the Cultural Book Society, who opened up a bookstore to spread communist literature throughout the province. During the warlord era, Mao Zedong was involved in the struggle for Hunan's autonomy. Mao Zedong hoped the Hunanese constitution might increase civil liberties, thus making his work to cause a communist revolution even easier. Well, his movement was successful at establishing a provincial autonomy under a Hunanese warlord, but Mao Zedong would find this not quite optimal. By that same year of 1921, communist groups had sprung up in Beijing, Shanghai, Wuhan, Guangzhou, Jinan, and Changsha, and on July the 23rd, it was decided they would form a central meeting. The first session of the National Congress of the CCP was in Shanghai, attended by 13 delegates, one being Mao Zedong. However, undercover police infiltrated the Congress, forcing the delegates to hop on a boat near Jiaxing in Zhejiang province to escape. Although Soviet and CCP delegates attended the first Congress, pretty much everyone ignored Lenin's advice to temporarily accept an alliance between them and the bourgeoisie Democrats, who were espousing a national revolution likewise, i.e., these were the KMT, of course. Instead, many in the CCP sought to stick to the strict Marxist belief that only an urban proletariat could cause a real communist revolution. At that point, Mao Zedong was the party secretary for Hunan province, working out of Changsha. In August, he founded the Self-Study University, where readers could gain access to the revolutionary literature he had been espousing. He also joined the YMCA mass education movement to combat illiteracy. Though it should be noted, he had a huge habit of editing textbooks to fit his communist ideals. He continuously organized worker strikes, particularly against the warlord governor of Hunan, Zhao Hongji. Some of these successful strikes were the Anyuan coal mine strikes, which saw both bourgeoisie and proletarian methodology incorporated. Mao Zedong had mobilized many walks of life: miners, gentry, military officials, merchants, triad members even, and members of the church. His work in the Anyuan mines also involved his wife, Yang Kai-he, who was fighting for women's rights. She sought to increase women's literacy, education, and political power within peasant communities. Mao Zedong and Yang Kai-he were not irregular in advocating for women's rights amongst the communist leaders, but they would soon be the most effective at it. Because of Mao Zedong's success in the Anyuan mines, Chen Duxiu invited him to become a member of the CCP Central Committee. Mao Zedong failed to make it to the Second Congress of the CCP in Shanghai, held in July of 1922, with the excuse he lost the address. There, the CCP delegates agreed to forming the First United Front. Mao Zedong enthusiastically agreed to this decision, arguing for an alliance across China's socio-economic classes. Mao Zedong's work in the First United Front would see him become the chief of propaganda for the KMT. Mao Zedong was a vocal anti-imperialist with a lot of his writing directed against the governments of the United Kingdom, the United States, and Japan. At the Third Congress of the CCP in Shanghai in June of 1923, the delegates reaffirmed their commitment to the First United Front. Here, Mao Zedong was elected to the party committee and took up residence in Shanghai. At the first KMT Congress held in Guangzhou in 1924, Mao Zedong was elected as an alternate member of the KMT Central Executive Committee, where he put forward resolutions to decentralize power to the urban and rural boroughs. His enthusiastic support for the KMT would earn him suspicion from his colleagues, such as Li Lisan, who had worked closely with him in Hunan. After the KMT Congress, he went to Shaoshan, where he found the peasants were becoming increasingly restless. Many had seized land and wealth from local landlords. This convinced Mao Zedong that peasants were an effective revolutionary force, something the KMT leftists were proposing, but not the CCP at the time. Later, Mao Zedong would be one of the many in the CCP calling for an end to the First United Front in the face of major grievances. However, Borodin continuously advised not to break off with the KMT. In the winter of 1925, Mao Zedong fled for Guangzhou after receiving a lot of heat for revolutionary activities. He led the sixth term of the KMT's Peasant Movement Training Institute. This was the first governmental-sponsored training institute for rural political activities. Here, Mao Zedong was secretly training and preparing militants while also teaching them basic socialist theory. When Dr. Sun Yat-sen died and Chiang Kai-shek rose to power, Mao Zedong supported his NRA and their Northern Expedition. Yet in the wake of the Northern Expedition, Mao Zedong was helping the peasants rise up, as they seized the land of wealthy landowners, and in many cases this was done with violence. It was this type of behavior that began to really ruffle some feathers of the KMT leaders, who of course were landowners themselves. In March of 1927, Mao Zedong appeared at the third plenum of the KMT Central Executive Committee in Wuhan, who were actively trying to strip Chiang Kai-shek of his power to bolster Wang Jingwei instead. Mao Zedong played an active role, pushing peasant issues, arguing for the death penalty to be exacted on those found guilty of counter-revolutionary activity, justifying it by simply stating, peaceful methods cannot suffice. In April, Mao Zedong was appointed to the KMT's 5-member Central Land Committee, where he urged peasants to stop paying rent. He then put into motion a draft resolution for land acquisition, calling for the confiscation of land belonging to, quote, local bullies and bad gentry, corrupt officials, militarists, and all counter-revolutionary elements in the villages. Mao Zedong then carried out a land survey stating that anyone owing over 30 mao, 4.5 acres that is, which constituted 13% of the population at the time, were uniformly counter-revolutionary. Many of his colleagues thought he was going too far, some not far enough. In the end, only some of his suggestions were partially implemented. When the Wuhan-Nanjing War broke out, Chiang Kai-shek performed the Shanghai Massacre, beginning the White Terror. The CCP state more than 5,000 communists were killed by the hands of the Green Gang in Shanghai. Over in Beijing, Jiang Zolin performed his own little White Terror, taking the life of those like Li Dajiao. In May, the CCP claimed tens of thousands of communists and their suspected allies were murdered, perhaps up to 25,000. The CCP continued to support the Wuhan government, something Mao Zedong supported initially. Yet by the time of the CCP's 5th Congress, he had changed his mind and he was staking all of his revolutionary hope on peasant militias. It really did not matter as the Wuhan government performed its own White Terror, albeit less violently in July. The CCP then founded the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army of China to go to war with Chiang Kai-shek. Thus, this brings us back to our story about the Autumn Harvest Uprising. In mid-August, Mao Zedong and Peng Gongda arrived in Changsha. For the later half of August, they helped reorganize the Hunan Provincial Committee, where the issue of how to launch the Autumn Harvest Uprising was discussed. Mao Zedong proposed narrowing the scope of the uprising after the results of the disastrous Nanchang Uprising. Regarding the area for the uprising, it was agreed that it should not be too large, and it should be concentrated around about 7 counties. They needed to rely solely upon the power of the peasants, with roughly 1 to 2 regiments of military as a backbone. They would no longer fly the KMT banner. Now it would be the red flag of the CCP. During the meeting, a firm agreement was made regarding land distribution. The current land revolution has reached the stage of fundamentally abolishing the land rent system and overthrowing the landlord regime. At this time, the party's policy towards farmers should be that the poor peasants lead the middle peasants, capture the rich peasants, and overthrow the landlord system. This is the land revolution. Mao Zedong also emphasized at the meeting, our party's previous mistake was to ignore the military. Now we should seize power and build power on the barrel of a gun. To usher in the Autumn Harvest Uprising, the Hunan Provincial Party Committee decided to establish 2 leading organizations. The first was the Front Committee, composed of various troops with Mao Zedong leading them. The other was the Action Committee, composed of county committees. They would be led by Yi Lirong. The uprising was scheduled to begin on September the 9th with the destruction of a railway. On the 11th, all the counties would revolt simultaneously. On the 15th, the revolt would break out in Changsha, and by the 16th it should be captured. At that time, Red Army forces were stationed in Xishu, Tonggu, Anyan, and along the border area of Hunan and Jiangxi. In early September, Mao Zedong arrived in Anyan and Tonggu, preparing the military leaders. It was decided the forces in Xishu, Tonggu, Anyan, and a few local counties would unify into the 1st Division of the 1st Workers' and Peasants' Revolutionary Army. The division was roughly 5,000 men, with Lu Duming as its commander-in-chief and Yu Yadu as its 1st Divisional commander. The 1st Division held 3 regiments. The 1st Regiment at Xishu, composed of the former National Revolutionary Army, 2nd Front Army Headquarters Guard Regiment, Pingjiang Workers and Peasant Volunteer Corps, and the Peasant Self-Defense Forces of Chongyang and Tongcheng counties in Hubei Province. The 2nd Regiment, located in Anyan, was composed of the Anyan Workers Picket Team, Anyan Mine Police Team, and some Peasant Self-Defense Forces in Anfu, Yangxin, Nanhua, Pingxiang, and Liling counties. The 3rd Regiment, located in Tonggu, was composed of the Luyang Workers and Peasants Volunteer Corps, a Guard Regiment, and part of the Pingjiang Workers and Peasants Volunteer Corps. The plan for the 1st Regiment was to capture Pingjiang, the 2nd Regiment would capture Pingjiang and Liling, the 3rd Regiment would capture Luyang. Afterwards, the regiments would simultaneously march upon Changsha, hopefully with the full cooperation of peasant armies who were performing uprisings in various counties as well as the urban workers in Changsha who hopefully would be performing their own uprising. On September the 9th, 60 railway workers in Changsha began destroying the railway lines from the city of Yuyang and Zhuzhou. On the 11th, the 1st Red Division launched the uprising. The 1st Regiment departed Xishui and Jiajing, advancing to Jiangshou Street via Longmen. Their main bulk entered Jinping when they were suddenly attacked by the Zhiguoshan Regiment, and this was remnants of the Guizhou warlord Wang Tianpei. The troops were scattered after losing 200 men and their weapons. The forces then moved quickly towards Pingjiang and Luoyang counties, trying to get closer to the 3rd Regiment. The 3rd Regiment at this time was under the direct command of Mao Zedong, who managed to capture Baixia and Luoyang County during the afternoon. On the 12th, he captured Dongmen City, annihilating a great part of the warlord forces there. On the 14th, 2 KMT battalions counterattacked Dongmen City. The 3rd Regiment fought them off for several hours before moving to Shangping. Meanwhile, the 2nd Regiment departed Anyan and attacked Pingxiang, failing to take it. On the 12th, they turned to Laoguan, due west of Pingxiang. With cooperation from a peasant uprising, they managed to capture Liling County, where they also defeated 1 KMT battalion, capturing a lot of weapons and rescuing 300 communist prisoners. On the 14th, another 2 KMT battalions from Changsha and another from Pingxiang all counterattacked Liling. The 2nd Regiment immediately turned north to attack Luoyang County on the 15th, but the KMT forces caught them and inflicted severe casualties. By the 17th, Mao Zedong ordered all regiments to concentrate in Wanjia City, due southeast of Luoyang City. At this point, the Red Army broke into separate offensives. Workers and peasants were performing uprisings in Pingjiang, Luoyang, Liling, Zhuzhou, Anyuan, and other places. The successes were of varying scales. Some of these peasant and worker armies were armed with nothing more than spears, broadswords, and some small arms. They resorted to house-to-house warfare, storming buildings, trying to capture guns. They massacred the gentry and landowning classes as they found them hiding in their homes. Red Army forces aided those in Liling and Luoyang, managing to capture the county seats, establishing revolutionary regimes. The uprisings in Zhuzhou saw its railway station captured, disrupting a lot of transportation. The uprisings in Pingjiang failed to gain the cooperation of the workers and peasants, so 3 guerrilla units were formed who raided the local area. Overall, however, the peasant and worker leaders were being arrested en masse by KMT officials. The peasants and workers became afraid they would be caught up in the White Terror slaughter, thus the uprising ultimately failed. The large worker urban uprisings that were supposed to break out in Changsha simply never formed. On the 19th, the entire 3rd Regiment, the remnants of the 1st Regiment, and the scattered members of the 2nd Regiment arrived in Wanjia City, one after another. That night, Mao Zedong presided over the CCP Front Committee meeting to analyze the situation and to figure out what to do with their forces now. They quickly decided to abandon attempts to capture Changsha. The remaining forces at Pingjiang and Luoyang departed as KMT were now hunting them down, pushing them south along the Luoxiao Mountains. On the 20th, they departed Wanjia City, heading towards Shangli City. It was there they learned there were some KMT troops assembling in Pingxiang, so they turned towards Luoxi on the 24th. They then continued south, but they were soon ambushed by KMT forces. Liu Deming was killed during the battle, leaving the army leaderless, seeing heavy casualties. On the 26th, the Red forces attacked and occupied Yuanhua, and by the 29th, they entered Sanwan village in Yongxing County. This time they were down to less than 1,000 men. Morale had all but collapsed. Their leadership began reorganizing at Sanwan. Now they were referring to their surviving force as the 1st Regiment of the 1st Division of the 1st Red Army. But in reality, they had only 2 battalions in strength. However, their reorganization efforts at least saw them form some proper companies and the implementation of more democratic systems. Afterwards, they continued south, arriving at Guchang in Yingan County on October the 3rd. There, Mao Zedong presided over another CCP Front Committee meeting. There they studied everything that had gone wrong with the Autumn Harvest Uprising. They made plans for establishing bases of operations for the 2 battalions, at that time led by Yuan Wensai and Wang Zhou. After the meeting, Mao Zedong led the forces to Maoping on the 7th. From there they moved to Sichuan County and Jiangxi. Then they moved a great distance through Hunan Province to Xiping, sitting within the Jinggang Mountains, the middle section of the Luoxiao Mountain Range by the 27th. From here onwards, our forces under the leadership of Mao Zedong would establish a revolutionary base of operations. The Autumn Harvest Uprising was the first time the CCP flag was publicly raised in an armed struggle. It was done to showcase to the people of China the determination of the CCP to independently lead a revolutionary war. After the failed uprising, Mao Zedong really began to take charge of the situation. He ditched the original Central Committee's plan to capture Changsha, and instead he marched a great distance into the deep rural areas where the KMT were at their weakest. He sought to embark on a guerrilla warfare campaign within the countryside. Here in these remote places, they would establish revolutionary bases, preserving and developing Red armies. The cost of the failure is honestly very difficult to estimate. There are claims anti-communist mass killings in Liling alone saw 80,000 killed, and perhaps 300,000 in areas like Jialing, Laiyang, Luoyang, and Pingjiang. Meanwhile, going back in time a bit to August of 1927, the failed Nanchang Uprising gradually split southwards to Zhangjiang, area of Guangdong. On the 7th, the CCP Central Committee held an emergency meeting where Chen Duxiu was criticized for his appeasement of the KMT right wing. It was also during this meeting the CCP formalized how they would go about implementing a land revolution and armed uprisings. On the 20th, Zhang Telei, the secretary of Guangdong's CCP Provincial Committee, discussed plans for a provincial-wide uprising. They would mobilize the workers and the peasants to hold riots in key locations within Guangdong, particularly Guangzhou. Thus, another major uprising was about to be unleashed. I would like to take this time to remind all of you that this podcast is only made possible through the efforts of Kings and Generals over at YouTube. Please go subscribe to Kings and Generals over at YouTube and continue to help us produce this content by checking out www.patreon.com/kingsandgenerals. And don't forget about our sister podcast over at the Pacific War Week by Week podcast, written and narrated by me. And if after all that, if you're still hungry for some more history, why don't you check out my personal channel, the Pacific War channel, found at YouTube and all major podcast platforms. For podcasts, I'm on episode 7 of my ongoing series on the North Africa campaign during World War II. As for YouTube, I'm about to release my first episode with a brand new animator covering the Battle of Ruhe, Operation Nika, that is the Japanese invasion of North China. The funds to pay the animator for that episode come from my Patreon account, which can be found at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War channel. Over there, for as little as $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive Patreon podcast, with over 25 podcasts and ongoing at this point, voting rights for the subjects I will tackle next, and of course, early access to all the content I make. The Autumn Harvest Uprising was a bold move by the CCP, as the Wuhan and Nanjing KMT governments unleashed their separate white terrors. The CCP were trying not only to survive, but to formulate their own revolutionary movement. Within the emerging communist vacuum, it seemed Mao Zedong had found his calling, and he was striving to reach the top.